I've made many Bravely videos over the last 2 years, and going back, I really liked giving this game 10 out of 10 perfect reviews. But as of late, I've become, or like to think that I've become, more objective when reviewing things. I think them out a bit more, and since I never did an actual review of Bravely Default in all this time, I think it's long overdue. Let's go spoiler free too, or as much as possible. Bravely Default is a turn-based JRPG released on Nintendo 3DS in 2012, and later in 2014 for North America. Developed by Silicon Studios and published by Square Enix, is a spiritual successor to the Final Fantasy series, evolving from what was initially going to be a sequel to the Four Warriors of Light. The story revolves around four main characters banding together to save the world after the world's crystals are shrouded in darkness, causing nature to fall into turmoil. The seas rot, the earth collapses, volcanoes erupt, you get the picture. Hot on their tail is the Duchy of Eternia, a government body led by commanding officers that attempt to stop the party from awakening the crystals. The story, in an overall sense, is good, despite being very generic. It has a strong flow that pulls you in and keeps on giving and giving, keeping you interested. The game's theme of being self-reliant, hence the title Bravely Default, is there but doesn't bash you over the head too much. And if you didn't know there was a theme, you might have missed it if you were just enjoying the game and not really thinking, like I did. The many twists that come later in the game are very intriguing, though there is an issue involving the later part of the story that I will address later in the review. Regardless, Default story feels almost fairy tale-like in nature, and is a fantastic medieval-esque journey for this modern era. The game consists of a party of four main characters. Agnes Oblige, the Vestal of Wind, a maiden who tends to the Wind Crystal and longs to purge the darkness now shrouding it. Tiz Orior, our protagonist, a country bumpkin who is the sole survivor after his village of Norende is swallowed by a great chasm, who joins Agnes to hopefully erase said chasm and bring back his village. Ringabel, a robust and charming young man who has no memory of his past or himself, save for a journal that contains events of the future. And lastly, Idia Lee, daughter of the Grand Marshal of Eternia, who turns traitor on the duchy after going against their beliefs. On the side, you have Aerie, the Christ fairy who aids the party and acts as a guide for the player. There are many more characters throughout the game, all of whom who are very unique and interesting in their own ways. Everyone is given a lot of personality that really sets them apart, though unfortunately, they are a bit dry. There is development for them, but overall, as a person, they don't change majorly. Party segments of the game, though, give the player fun, candid interactions between the party members, but unfortunately as well, performances by the voice actors are hit or miss. Sometimes they're really on point, and others are not. Overall, Bravely Default offers a cast of very fun and interesting characters, but leave a little to be desired in the development department. Now let's discuss gameplay. Every game should have good gameplay as to not frustrate the player. After all, these things are supposed to be fun, right? Bravely Default is no exception, taking the turn-based battle system and giving it a few cool twists, most notably the Brave and Default system. On a turn, you may give up taking an action and guard with Default, and you will gain a Brave Point, or BP. You can then spend these BP by using Brave to take multiple actions on a turn instead. You may also Brave without BP, but then you will have to wait all the extra turns you took before being able to do anything again. SP is another type of point in the game, earned through either leaving your DS in sleep mode for 8 hours with the game on, or the unnecessary microtransactions that I never understood their reason of existence in the game. SP can be used to pause the battle at any point, even in the middle of an enemy attack, and get your own attack in, and can go over the normal damage cap. The game also makes use of the 3DS's Street Pass function, allowing players to send out moves they do in battle to be used by other players, a great mechanic overall. The Street Pass function is also used in a Norende rebuilding minigame, where Street Passing other players puts more people in your village, allowing the real-time constructions to decrease, giving players access to more items and gear in less time. Default also makes use of the 3DS's AR reader to display movies on your screen that can take place in your living room. This game pushes the 3DS to its limits, making use of every function imaginable, and even using the 3D with this game isn't half bad. And making use of this many functions is something I would love to see a lot more in other games. Visually, the game is beautiful. It is not a masterpiece of realism, but it excels in its own style. Gorgeous watercolor backgrounds make playable areas for various parts, and were both surprising and pleasant to see upon initially starting. There is also a mix of some 3D overhead dungeon crawling environments. Character design is nice, and the outfits are very appealing. Normal enemies are a bit on the generic side, but bosses have a little bit more going on, so they look kinda cool. I will mention that I personally love the penultimate and final boss designs, so in terms of art, Bravely Default certainly gets a pass from me. Since the art style was just covered, let's go over the music. This point alone is a selling point for the game, as it still remains my #1 video game soundtrack with its unique sound of what I will call orchestrated rock. If anyone knows a name for it besides what the Wikipedia says, I'd be happy to know. But don't just take my word for it, you've been listening to it throughout this video. The soundtrack was composed by Revo and performed by his band Sound Horizon. If it sounds familiar, they did the first Attack on Titan opening. So basically imagine an entire game with music like that. Every song in this game has its own heavily distinct feel, from mystifying, peaceful ambience, to feelings of dread and despair, to the coolest boss themes ever. The music of Bravely Default is certainly one of its most recognized features, and undeniably a great soundtrack as a whole. Being perfectly honest for a moment, the initial reason I bought the game was because of hearing the soundtrack. There are two big problems that can make Default a very tedious game and does drag it down as a whole. The first issue, without giving away major story spoilers, is that in the later parts of the game you are literally repeating the same thing about 5 times in a row. This grows very tiresome very quickly. They attempted to make it a little more interesting by changing some slight things up each run, but it is not enough to make the repetition any better. This section can be really painful to get through, and really feels like more of an attempt to just get the game to an 80-hour mark. It mostly also just serves as a very boring way to get a portion of the story across, and almost makes playing a hassle more than fun. The other big problem is the later level job grinding. Now yes, RPGs are known for grinding out dungeons to get ready for boss fights and such, but getting those last few job levels in Default is particularly nasty if you don't know any of the good farming spots, and even then it still requires more time than is probably necessary or appropriate to finish mastering a class. So when you're leveling someone up, make sure you pick a class and stick with it, because changing is going to be a bitch. But despite these waits, Bravely Default still rises and surpasses expectations. Even Square Enix is to the point that, because of its success, despite being a traditional turn-based RPG, made them reevaluate their game-making processes, focusing less on just appealing to the West. So, overall, do I recommend Bravely Default? Of course I do. I've been loving this game for the last 2 years on this channel. If you're looking for a good, solid, immersive game to keep you entertained for a fair length of time with lots of quality content, amazing music, and fun gameplay, especially since you can take your 3DS on the go, then go out and pick up this game. Just try to hold out through its dry bits during the second half, and when you assign your party roles, stick to them to avoid the monotony of job leveling. And that's all she wrote. I might just redo my Bravely second review while I'm at it, but you never know. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. If you have any questions or requests for future videos, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.